All right, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 Friedman Index webinar. Thanks so much for coming and joining us today to hear more about this wonderful piece of work that Ben Scafidi and Colyn Ritter worked on. Today, you're going to hear from two of our awesome people, including Ben Scafidi, but then Catt is going to come in and speak on behalf of Colyn today while he is at a conference. So, just in short, our two presenters are indeed Ben Scafidi and Drew. And Ben is a professor at Kennesaw State University in Georgia. Um, he is the director of the Education Economics Center there, and he is also one of our Friedman Fellows. And then Catt is our vice president of training, and he has a history of 10 years on our research and thought leadership team here at EdChoice. And he brings so much to the table and has helped out a ton with this project as well. So, with that being said, hit it off, guys.
Right. Thanks, Margot. The 2025 EdChoice Friedman Index. How much private education choice do families in your state really have? We had four inspirations for this work. Of course, first was Milton and Rose Friedman. EdChoice is the legacy foundation of Milton and Rose Friedman, and the Friedmans believed that universal choice in K-12 education would greatly improve educational opportunities for children. The second inspiration is the great John Merrifield, who's I'm honored that he's on this call today. John was one of the first researchers studying school choice, and he created something called the Private School Access Index. And our index is a close sibling of his PSAI. Third inspiration was when Colyn and I first presented this to Robert Enlow and the senior team at EdChoice. Unbeknownst to us, Robert was working on a new tagline for EdChoice. And where they were landing was they wanted all students to have all options and all dollars. And what we came up with dovetailed perfectly with their new tagline. The fourth inspiration was lots of states are passing these big education choice bills that people are calling universal. So we're going to look at how universal these things really are. And EdChoice staff have been painstakingly collecting data and in real time updating a repository of the details of each state's education choice programs. And Catt, the reason he's pinch hitting today for Colyn is Drew personally collected a lot of this data and showed other EdChoice staff how to do it. And so if they didn't do this, including Drew, we wouldn't be able to do this work at all. The EdChoice Friedman Index is a state level index, and it ranges between 0 and 100. So if a state has no private school choice program, you get a 0. So we're talking about private education choice. And the minimum score for a state with a private choice program is a 1. So how do we calculate the index? The index itself is, sorry. How do you get a perfect score? All right, a perfect score for the EdChoice Friedman Index is all students, all dollars, all options. Are all children eligible to participate in a private education choice program in your state? And is there funding available? Is there funding available for all families who wish to exercise this private education choice? Colyn and Ed Tarnowski at EdChoice like to call this funded universal eligibility. So it's not enough to make everyone eligible, all children eligible. You've got to have funding available for all families who want to exercise this choice. So that's all students. All dollars is the average ESA award to choice students is equal to the average of state plus local per pupil revenues in public schools. We took out federal funding on purpose because state legislators have no say over it. But also, we made that strategically. We don't want the federal government anywhere near these state choice programs. Now, we call it all dollars, but we're kind of cheating because the data on state and local per pupil revenues is 3 years old. So for three reasons, we're not really at all dollars. We're about 25% cheaper than district public schools. So if a choice program is 25% cheaper per student than district public schools, we're going to give them a perfect score for all dollars. Reasons for that is because the public school data is 3 years old. Second, the public school data includes charter schools who get less money than district public schools. And third, we're taking out federal money. All right, all options. All right, are choice programs multi-use? Can families use their choice dollars to offset tuition payments at private schools, but also for other things outside of school walls, like different therapies and tutoring and what have you? So if you have all students, all options, all dollars, you'll get a perfect score. And here's how the index is calculated. It's 100 times the percent of students eligible for choice. And again, that's funded eligibility times the average award per choice student divided by state and local revenues in public schools 3 years ago. Um, uh, and so that's how it's calculated. And it's at the state level. However, for all options, we make a deduction. So we do up to a 5 point deduction from your state score if you don't have a multi-use program. And if you do have like a lot of states have like an ESA program for special needs students, but just a voucher program for non-special needs students. If your state's like that, we do a proportional deduction, proportion to the number of students who can get an ESA. And now I'm going to turn it over to Drew. So thanks.
Thanks, Ben. I kind of gave away the next few slides as I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself there. Yeah, Ben and Colin did some amazing work in making this as both complex and most importantly simple as possible. So taking some complex data sets and really trying to boil it down into an easy to understand number for everyone. And I think Colin is staying silent while he's eating his lunch at a public opinion research conference. So Colin, if I misstate anything, feel free to unmute yourself and hop in. But yeah, so Ben kind of laid out the purpose and how the formula goes. So let's really dive into what people kind of think of as the most universal choice state, and that would be Florida. So as you can see here, Florida has a score of 77. And the way that we get at that is first we look at the state and local revenues per student in public schools, which for Florida, for the most recent data, is a little under $11,000 per student. And then the average private choice funding amount per student in Florida is just under $8,400. And then Florida does have universal funded eligibility. It's not just that every student is eligible, but there is funding attached so that every student that wants to participate can. So that's 100% funded eligibility. And then you take the funding times the funded eligibility, and you get Florida with an EdChoice Friedman score of 77. Now that, I will say, spoiler alert, that is the highest score that we have. As Ben may have pointed out, the Friedmans may or may not have wanted a top score of 100, just based on potential savings due to the programs. But we're not here to discuss that today. We're just cutting and looking at the raw scores. So the newest player in town is Texas. And Texas, compared to Florida 77, may look a little small. However, Texas starting out at a 2 is huge. The majority of states that have new programs round positively up to 1. I just wanted to dive into the formula myself, so I did a few of the scores. And like as Ben said, the lowest score that a state with the program can have is 1, and some of those are rounded up from negative numbers. So Texas starting at a 2 is massively huge. So the way that we got that Colin and Ben calculated that is they looked at the state and local revenues per student in public schools, which based on the most recent data was just under 12,000. For this, they assumed an average scholarship per student of just under 10,500. Depending on what students participate, what proportion of students that apply the first year have special needs, that amount may actually be higher than what we're estimating than what is being estimated at this point. And then even though Texas does have universal eligibility, remember, it's the funded eligibility that matters for this. So even though every student in Texas is eligible to apply for the program, there is only enough funding allocated to the program for about 2% of all K-12 students in Texas to be able to participate. So with that, we take the difference in funding, uh, or the funding equation multiplied by the funded eligibility for Texas to get that score of 2. Again, 2 is huge. Just going to 1 is massive, and going from 1 to 2 is big. So starting out at 2 is really, really big for Texas. So let's look at or before we dive into some of the comparative scores, I'm going to touch again on some of the data choices made. So as Ben said, some of the public funding data is a little old. 21, 22 is the most recent year that we were able to get that calculate the per pupil revenue, both at the state and local level, and not just spread across state, local, federal. And then we also Ben and Colyn used the most recent data on eligibility for choice programs and average awards. So keep in mind that for some of the newer universally phased in programs, it will be universally phased in by a certain point in the near future. So Colin and Ben aren't counting that towards the universal metrics and to calculate the index scores. And then again, if the policy is in law and it's being phased in, Colin and Ben are giving that state credit. And then when it comes to states with multiple programs, they assumed a stacking rate of 15%, unless there's some strong data to show otherwise, such as a leveraging strong partnership with Kate Baker and Children's Scholarship Fund in New Hampshire to look at their data. And we know that it's 85% stacking. And a lot of that is based on the work of Marty Lucan and the Fiscal Research and Education Center at EdChoice. We also or Ben and Colin also gave partial deductions for states with some students using ESAs. So Ben kind of touched on, but if 20% of the students are able to use an ESA, but the other percent get the vouchers or tax credit scholarships, they deduct 4 points instead of the 5. For example, it'd be a 5-point deduction if 0% of the students are using ESAs or similar multi-purpose programs. So let's dive into the table. All right, as you can see here, Florida is at the top with the index score of 77. And as you can see, the majority of the ones in the top do have 100% funded eligibility. The Indiana data point will get tweaked with that expansions. The table will be updated by Ben and Colin later this summer or early this fall to kind of capture all of the new programs and expanded programs that have happened over the last handful of weeks. So really, it's um, the kind of quote unquote old players on the block with kind of Wisconsin and Ohio going back to their programs in the 90s. So they even though they've had one of the longest runs of programs, because Ohio does not, neither of them have any multi-use program. And if you look, Ohio isn't doing as well in the all dollars compared to Wisconsin, but Wisconsin doesn't have 100% universal funded eligibility as Ohio does. And then Alaska has a correspondence program that all the students are eligible for. And then New Hampshire with their multiple programs in the ESA with between the funded eligibility and all dollars coming in at 15. So really, those are all the double-digit states that you see. And I've had some talks with Ben and Colin about like, well, is there a cutoff level that if you're above this amount, you're doing good and not? And it's like, no, if you're on the map, you're doing a great job. You made it on the map. After that point, it's really arguing over what would be the ideal for Milton and Rose. It's would they want every state to have 100? Would they be okay with states having 70 to 80 if the only differentiation is cost savings passed down to the taxpayers? And then really it trickles down after Oklahoma into Georgia, Tennessee, Mississippi, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming having twos, with Idaho being the newer state with their refundable tax credit program. And then from that point on, it's a lot of ones. And again, because I did some of the calculations, not for this, but just to see how what went in, kind of what went into the sausage making, if you will. Um, a lot of the states that say no, they do not have a multi-use program, are potentially negative. They would be negative numbers that are rounded up to a positive Friedman Index score of 1, just to give credit for having that private school choice program.
Hey, Drew, can I make one
Yeah.
comment about Utah?
Yes.
So they have universal eligibility, but they only have funding for, I can't remember, it's like 10,000 students, right? So look at their all dollars, 79%. Utah would be in first place in the country if they had universal funded eligibility. And so that's kind of interesting. But sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, you're fine. Thank you for pointing that out. That was a point that I forgot. That is, yes, Catherine Bathgate would love that. As would a lot of Utahns. Yeah, and that's true for a lot of the states. I'm sorry if I go a little quickly here, but if you look, yeah, Florida's at 77, but there are a lot of states that are in the 70s already, with Wisconsin at 70%, Tennessee at 71, Maine at 72. So yes, Utah could be in first place, but there are a lot of states that could jump up into the 70s quickly just by expanding to full eligibility, not just universal eligibility, but universal funded eligibility. And as you can see, some of those lower funded programs, even if they have large eligible population, it's the funding that limits the score and making since the funded eligibility is less than 1%, it's rarely going to be a score over 1. And with that, I will pass it back to Ben.
Thanks, Drew. So the virtues of the Friedman Index are that it gives states an intuitive score between 0 and 100, and that it allows state level policymakers and state level advocates to see exactly what they need to do to give families more choice for their students. And then consequently, how you would boost your EdChoice Friedman Index score. Again, just to repeat, to be deemed universal, it's not enough for states to make 100% of students eligible for choice programs. You need to make sure that every student who wants a multi-use ESA can get one, funded eligibility is the right metric, and that average ESA awards are equal to the average of state and local funding per pupil in public schools, again, to get a perfect score. So that's the virtues of the indexes. So the components of the index are actually very important along with the total score. Next slide, please. And so, okay, potential concerns. In the report, we are generous to states with a Freeman Index score of 1. 1 is infinitely higher than 0. Colyn and I and a bunch of people at EdChoice know, and a bunch of you on this call know firsthand how hard it is to get a choice bill passed in your state. So we're not denigrating anyone with a 1 or a 0.2 or whatever, right? We know that zero's, infinitely lower than 1. What we're trying to do is help advocates on the ground see what they need to do to give families more true choice. And as Drew said, even choice advocates really might not want a score of 100. Maybe you think the very highest income families should not be eligible. Maybe you think, we're again, our all dollars is 25% cheaper. Maybe you think that's too generous, right? Maybe you don't want to bring bloated spending from the public K-12 system to a choice system. And we're hip to all that. And we talk about that a little bit in the report. Next slide, please. In the future, and we put it when we first made this slide, if folks find this useful, we've presented this to like 15 state and national groups, and they seem to like it. So we are going to update this in the fall because a lot of states are passing new programs now and expanding programs. And also, we're getting more information about the details of state programs, so some state scores will change. But also in the future, as states get higher and higher EdChoice Friedman Index scores, we're going to increase the deductions for all options. We're going to, if you regulate private providers in some way, we're going to give a bigger deduction for that. If you limit options to families in various ways, we're going to, give you a bigger deduction for that. Some of you probably saw me present this and Colyn presented at the ISCRC back in January. And Patrick Wolf was like, no, if you change the way you calculate the score, we can't use it for research. But my answer then is still the same as it is today. Yes, you can. The first two components, all students and all dollars, will not change over time. We're not changing that metric. We're just changing the deduction. So if a researcher wanted to use this data, over time, you could just parse out the deduction we make for all options. And then last thing here, we might place states in bands. Again, for the issue of maybe you don't want really the score to be 97. Maybe you think that's too high. So we might say if you're an 85 or something, you're a platinum state. If you're 70 to 85, you're a gold state, 60, 70, silver, bronze, and then if you don't have a program, you don't get a medal. We're going to play around with that. We might not do that next go round, but we're going to do that at some point in the future. And now what remains to be done is we're going to put more and more stuff on the web. Margot's been very good about posting in the chat stuff we currently have on the web. And you can get like a spreadsheet tab for your state or any state you want to see and see the details. We had to aggregate in many states a bunch of programs to get one number, and then you can see the data choices we made. And then Drew's going to show you in a second some infographics and stuff on the web. Now, this last point's important. The details of these programs really, really matter for creating this index. If we have some detail wrong, or we haven't updated some detail, please email Colyn at colyn@edchoice.org and tell us where we can get the latest and greatest information.
Yeah, and I think the same goes for the deductions related to the multi-use program. So I think and the Q&A is a great opportunity to chime in and any additional things that could be added in there, such as looking at whether or not there's a lottery for the program, if it's oversubscribed, that sort of thing.
That's a great
Um,
point, Drew. And just one last thing. When
yeah,
I was having breakfast with someone from Stride K-12, and I was telling her about this right before it came out. And she goes, Florida doesn't let students use ESAs at private virtual schools. So the state has a public virtual school where you can go, but so I'm like, well, we're going to do a deduction for that, right? Again, any kind of limiting choices, and I know Catherine Bathgate's done a lot of work. I'm sure we'll rely on a lot of that stuff. Um, uh, but thank you, Drew. But I'll turn it over to Drew now.
all right, thanks, Ben. And Colin chiming in the chat, making sure that everyone knows that he's just at the American Association for Public Opinion Research's conference. But yeah, anyone who has been, speaking of research conferences, anyone who has ever been at a research conference, with me for more than an hour knows I love making maps. So that was one of my entrances into this project, is coming alongside the wonderful work that Ben and Colin did. So this is all available online through the report landing page and multiple other areas through the EdChoice website, and Margo will be sharing as well. So here it's an interactive both map and chart, so everything can be sorted. So you can actually go online and see what the ranking is based on funded eligibility, what it is based on the funding. And then also each component of this is clickable through the map. So you can go in and click right to your state. So for example, if I was to click Florida, it would take me to a page that looks like this for Florida, where you can kind of dive in and see what the percents are for the all students, the all dollars, and the all options, kind of in one space. And also the great language that Colin added on what can really be done in each state to increase that EdChoice Friedman Index score. And from here, you can go back to the map table, see other programs and so forth. Another great state example that folks have been asking for is Texas. So the biggest thing that Texas can do is really increasing that funded eligibility. Since 100% of students are eligible to apply, being able to have that funding increase so that not only can they apply for the program, but they're guaranteed that the funds are there for them if they're eligible for the program. And then also, just because I wanted to have a little fun, special for this, I've been doing some back of the napkin work on what would the EdChoice Friedman Index, map look like if ECA passed. So here we are. Without ECA, I added Texas to the left. It hasn't been added online yet. Here's what on the left side, it's the current look at the EdChoice Friedman Index. On the right, you have what the map would look like if ECA passes. Really, all it does is it takes any state from a 0 to a 1. If you look, it doesn't really make any states darker purple or get closer to that full unencumbered choice, but it does do the great job of, if it passes, getting everyone on the map so that everyone can start marching together towards full unencumbered choice. And with that, we'll open it up to any Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah. And one thing, if you saw the movie Moneyball, Colyn is really the Peter Brand of the education choice movement. I can't thank him enough. It's so great to work with him. He has all the data at his command. And again, people like Drew and Ed and the whole outreach team at EdChoice have collected this data over many years, and it wouldn't be possible without them. But then Colyn just organizes it so well. So I want to publicly thank Colyn. I really love working with him.
Colyn certainly is a rock star. We do have our first question. They're just clarifying this is private school choice only, correct?
Correct, correct.
And then they said, if so, does the average public school dollar amount include a state's charter schools?
Yes, and that's one reason why we're about 25% cheaper than district public schools in our all dollars perfect score.
And by the way, if you want to ask any questions, you can pop them into the chat or you can just unmute yourself. Either way is fine. We're open to a full conversation if you want to have one.
I'll jump in with sort of a two-part question. And just, I saw you present this, Ben, at ISCRC in January. I'm excited to finally be on one of these calls to learn more and get a little more granular. But yeah, I mean, there's two things that come to mind for me that I'm curious about. One is, just I presume that as you guys update this, you'll be looking at whether or not the per dollar amount that's set in state law for ESA is going up with other public schools. I mean, that percentage is going to fluctuate. So like in particular, Utah had a wonderful provision in the original law that it would rise with a 5-year trailing factor of CPI. And so that was to make sure that it did not become a diluted amount over time compared to the public school dollar allocation. So that's one that they've actually taken that away, which I think is unfortunate. But anyway, so that's one that like I presume that may go down a little bit next year. So Utah may not keep that 79 when you run that again, because they're keeping it at a flat 8, or well, now they're doing 4 for homeschool, and there's all sorts of other complicating factors going into that formula. But anyway, that's just one, and I guess that's more of a comment because I see you shaking your head yes, so I presume that.
Yeah, we absolutely will, Catherine. We will use the latest and greatest data, and
Okay.
if we don't have it, email Colyn, and
Okay.
we'll
Okay.
put it in.
Okay, great. And then the other one was you were talking briefly toward the end about just other factors or things to be thinking about that impact true freedom and access for families. And I'm just curious if you guys have talked about or been thinking about the regulatory environment that families find themselves in. So Drew knows, as the EdChoice team knows very well, some of the challenges we've had in Utah in 2025. And specifically, like I was just sending a screenshot to Enlo yesterday of someone who had the game SMATH rejected, SMATH. It's a game that's supposed to make learning math facts fun. And the reason it was rejected is that it wasn't tied to games were not approved anymore, and it's not tied to a Utah state core standard now. And so I just wonder to what extent that might be folded in the future, things like that to show who's actually truly allowing parents to be the deciders of what is appropriate education for their kids versus putting them in a box and making them comply with, you know, state bureaucrats' opinions on what is and isn't educational.
Catherine, you are 100% right on both your points. When we first presented this to Robert Enlow and his leadership team back in September, Robert made the same point as you. He's like, states are starting to take choices away from families, and you
Yep.
got to dock them more. And our response then, and it's the same today, we don't have data at that time to do
Right.
more docking, but we are going to spend more effort to try to get that data. And if something's going on funky in states like Utah or any state you know about,
Yep.
please emails. Like I didn't know Florida restricted. It's kind of funny, right? Florida puts competition on district public schools, but then insulates their own state school from virtual school from competition, right? Kind of ironic.
The Florida
But
virtual learning program. Mm-hmm.
yeah, but we are going to do more deductions in the future, 100%. The issue is going to be, do we have some kind of factoid or data or
Right.
law or regulatory thing to document it so we can do it credibly? But
Okay.
yes, we are very hip to that. And Robert said that the first time we presented it to him.
Okay, great. Not surprised. He and I have been talking a lot about this over the last 6 months, but I would love to be helpful to y'all as I can be on that front.
Yeah, we
Thank you.
will rely on you. Thank you. Thank you.
And then along those lines, kind of with the funding, I think almost any state with a double-digit score is likely going to see that score decrease. Um, if and when there's ever a new NCES report that shows what the 22-23 per pupil revenue is for public school students, since we're currently using the 21-22. So yeah, the 2023 we assume will be higher in every state. So that will kind of deflate some of those scores tentatively.
Hey, I'll answer the questions in the chat. Edward, we've presented this to like Alec. There was one other group where state legislators were on, and they were taking it seriously. And they love those one pagers at the end. If you could go a slide or two back, Drew, uh, because that's something that's easy to digest at the state capitol. And this was Colyn's idea. It's brilliant. And someone actually said something we can make these a little better. Again, keeping them not busy, but yeah. And then we'll probably present this at EdChoice has these events for legislators coming up in the fall that Drew runs, and I'll let you know then how they take it. And then Christy, there's no deduction for having a prior public school enrollment number because that is captured in the all students column. So for example, if you have to have a prior public school thing, it'll be captured in the all students. So we are capturing it in that way. So great questions and great comments. Thank you guys. And Martha's comment was great too at the beginning. So Martha, right now, all options is just, do you have a multi-use program like an ESA program or some other multi-use program or not? But in the future, we're still gonna keep that one. We're just gonna increase the number of points from 5. Maybe we'll go to 10 at first, but over time, as states are starting to be 60s and 70s, we might make the deductions even bigger than that. But if they do things like Catherine was saying on limiting choices for families or regulating choices in some way, we'll do more deductions there. But it'll be kind of state specific because different states will do different bad things, right? But that's a great point. Great point.
Yeah, and I've learned when looking into what ESA programs provide in which states that there are some things that are unique to a specific state that, like, for example, they already publicly fund something for students that other states typically don't. So that could get wrapped into the ESA program just for that state. But comparing that to another state, the other state wouldn't have it because it's not something that they provide to their public school students already. So that's even possible that the definition of all options can possibly increase because there could be an increase in options in a state like Arizona and what's permissible, even though currently there's little that is not.
Hey Ben, it's Michael. I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Obviously we all know Indiana is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts on this call. Um, and Indiana got docked a bit on the all dollars portion. I'm curious if you ran the numbers, just as an example, on what charter schools in Indiana receive, because we get in Indiana they get a separate facilities allotment in the state budget, and then in the future they're going to get local property tax dollars. I'm just curious to know what that number is if we just funded um, private school students the same as a charter school student in Indiana, how much better we would be on the Friedman Index. So, just my 2 cents. I'd just be curious to know what that number is.
Michael, you're one of the smartest people I know, and that is a brilliant insight. Um, we put at the end of the report, how can you get your all dollars numbers up? And one was fund these ESA programs the same way you fund charter schools, right? Is one way to do it. However, that works in your state, just do it for choice students, in private choice programs. I have not done that calculation for Indiana, but two states, West Virginia and now Florida, different groups of those states, when they saw this EdChoice Index, Friedman Index, they said, can you help us think about how to get our all dollars up? So I've gone into some nitty gritty details in both West Virginia and Florida on that. And we should do it for states like Indiana, states where there maybe is a big push to get the all dollars up. Maybe that's something I could work with EdChoice on that. But you're 1,000% right, Michael, about where this needs to go to give families more options. Truly give them more options. Great point. Oh yeah. So Margot posted the comment I put in the report. So about that issue.
Gotta love the command and find feature, right?
And yeah, I think one of the things that I love about this work, Ben, is that it really takes us kind of as a movement, in my opinion, to the next level, where it's not just the can you fill in the whole map, but what color is the map and how much full and encumbered choice exists within the map. So really getting as many of those states to that deep purple as possible over the coming years.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
agree, Christy. The Echo map Drew did is amazing.
Maybe I should put a blog post out on that.
And I got to say one last thing. Colyn and I are two little teeny guys standing on John Merrifield's shoulders. John was a huge inspiration. His work was a huge inspiration for this work. And John, every time we present this, we tell people that. And it's been on that slide since day one because it's true. Thank you, John, for your great work for many years, but also on this.